able to see it?
Yes, we could see a schedule, a calendar.
Yeah, let me get rid of that. Hold on a second. Yeah, let's try it again. Window. That's better.
Okay, we could see that.
Okay. Stop presenting. I don't want to stop presenting. All right. So I thought, considering we're starting a new book of the Torah, to do a class that's a little bit broader, especially because it's the book of Devarim, known in English as Deuteronomy, which is a little bit different than the four other books. So the book of Devarim, of Deuteronomy, is known in Hebrew as Devarim. It's the fifth and final book of the five books of Moses. It has strong emphasis on obedience to the covenant in family and national life. Right? So one of the foundations of Judaism is that we have a deal with God. And basically, to oversimplify it, we follow God's commandments and God protects us. And to broaden it a little bit, we follow God's commandments and God gives us the land of Israel. And there's a whole bunch of commandments specific to the land of Israel. Devarim is also called Mishneh Torah, not to be confused with the Rambam's work, also known as Mishneh Torah, which literally translated as the repetition of the Torah. Although there are 199 new commandments in Devarim, there are many passages that seem only to repeat ideas and mitzvot mentioned before in the Chumash and the other four books. The entire giving of the Torah and God's proclaiming to us the Ten Commandments is also repeated here, seemingly without purpose, right? What's the point of repetition, especially when we say that every word and every letter of the Torah is there to teach us something? Why would it repeat it? There are some differences in how, for example, the Aseret Dibrot, the Ten Commandments, the Ten Utterances are written. For example, probably the most known example is when it comes to Shabbat. One says Shamor, to guard, another one says Zachor, to remember. Right? Now, you can either look at it as semantics or you can see significance in there. There's also some things that seem contradictory to similar laws. A couple of the big ones are the boundaries of Israel. In Deuteronomy, the description includes a much larger territory, right? In this past week's parsha, we talked about the unplanned adding on to the territory in the Transjordan, right? It was supposed to, the original plan, at least it seems, was supposed to be Israel was going to be west of the Jordan River. But then the tribes of Reuven and Gad and part of Manasseh ended up inheriting land east of the Jordan. And so in Devarim, in a couple of places that I'll show in a little bit, it refers to the eastern border as the Euphrates River, which is in modern-day Iraq, which is a lot further east than Jordan. Scholars have also pointed out in Deuteronomy there's unique demanding of centralized sacrifice, whereas opposed to in other books, it talks about bringing sacrifices, but it doesn't insist that all of them be brought in Jerusalem in the temple. And again, as I mentioned yesterday, there was a famous case where these tribes who settled in Jordan, once the war was over, built an altar and made sacrifices. And from the perspective of Deuteronomy, that's really problematic. Other examples can be found just, there are many lists, but Wikipedia is easy for everybody to find. So I don't know if you'll be able to see it or if it doesn't go there. Okay. Put it in library mode. Maybe it'll go there. There we go. So somebody in Wikipedia put together a list of laws that are repetitions that can be found in other parts. Laws that are a little different, and then laws that are unique to the book of Deuteronomy. So just some examples: against false prophets, ordering judges to be appointed in every city. There was talk about appointing leaders before, but it gets much more specific. Military law, criminal law. There's specific rules about kings, the sexual limitations, etc. All right. I'm back. So the book of Deuteronomy can be seen in many different ways, right? I mentioned before, one way of looking at it is as the Mishnah Torah, repetition of the Torah. Another way is for those that believe that there's different authors to the different books of the Torah. There seems to be more and more of a consensus that the book of Deuteronomy was actually written first, even though it's the fifth book of the Torah. And it's seen as Moshe's first-person farewell address. Right, they're on the precipice. They're about to go into Israel, and Moses is getting one last shot because he's not going in with them to give his message. And I've talked about this before. There's a lot of emphasis on writing our last will and testament, but not as much on writing an ethical will, or what we hope for our children, our family in the future, our message. Right? And he starts it off with going back through the history and a list of different events that happened, how Bnei Yisrael responded to it, and then there's a lot of rebuke, and I'll talk about that a little bit further. So Deuteronomy is more than just a repetition of the law. The Gra, the Vilna Gaon, for example, points out that only a third of Deuteronomy is about mitzvot. Make Deuteronomy a book about other things as well, including particularly dire forecasts of punishment for sin. But, says Ramban, not to be confused with Rambam, these warnings are not meant to frighten us into obedience, just the reverse. They underscore the centrality of God's compassion. People are assailable, they can repent. God regularly reaches out and hands in forgiveness. So while I appreciate the message of Ramban, we do have a tradition when we read the curses to kind of mumble them, to say them too loud when we're reading. So when the cantor does that, it's not that he's losing his voice. It's an intentional, even though the motivation according to Ramban might be not to scare people too much, it's scary. It's a pretty harsh language. It also, of course, has one of the most critical and crucial statements in Judaism, the Shema. And then that next section that's repeated after it, which aren't actually in the Torah, in the book of Devarim, aren't written consecutively. We recite them one after the other, but they aren't written consecutively. And And then the proximity of Tisha B'Av and reading of Deuteronomy may not have been done intentionally, but there's a powerful connection for those that believe that God punishes, or at least that there are spiritual consequences for our actions. Right? The destruction of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem, the exile, and all of the tsaras that have come since then, kind of match up with some of those scary, curses and punishment ideas. And so it really brings it home, reading it at this time of year when we're reflecting about all the tsaras. And Tisha B'Av has come to kind of reflect all the tsaras and all the anti-Semitism that we've faced over the years. So we start off it was in the 40th year, right? So this reinforces that it's the end of the period in the desert. In the 11th month, I just turn it this way so I can be looking at the screen and you at the same time. Oh, that's not good. All right, here we go. It was 11th month that Moses addresses the Israelites, the instruction that the Lord had given him for them. There we go. Just put this on that screen. So, obviously we're not going to read the entire book of Devarim right now because that's impossible. Which actually leads me to another thought about Devarim. So at one point, Moses says, you should engrave all of this Torah on stone tablets, right? And or this Torah on tablets. And the question becomes, what exactly does he mean by this Torah? And in other parts of Devarim as well, this self-referential, this referring to the Torah, there's a big question about what's meant by that. Is it the particular laws in the book of Devarim? Is it the book of Devarim? Is it all 5 books? And there's differences of opinion about that. Often you see in a specific section that has a bunch of laws that it says this Torah, which would imply that it's talking about that specific area, not the whole thing. Because otherwise, there should be a lot of stones that are engraved. And hopefully we would find one. Start out and make your way to the hill country of the Amorites and to all the neighbors in the Araba, the hill country, the Shephelah, the Negev, the seacoast, the land of Canaanites, and the Lebanon. So this, as far as the great river Euphrates. So this is what I was talking about before, where the borders of this new country are written in a much broader way. And this is another example of it. Every spot on which your foot treads shall be yours. Your territory shall extend from the wilderness to Lebanon, right? Lebanon is in the north, and from the river, the Euphrates, to the western sea. So Jacob Milgram comments on this. The contrast between Deuteronomy and the priestly material in Numbers could not be sharper. Deuteronomy has accommodated itself to history. Numbers has not. The priestly tradition consistently adheres to the map of Canaan as it existed up the 13th century and does not admit to its slightest alteration in the light of subsequent events. Once again, the priestly texts have proved themselves to be the bearers of Israel's most ancient tradition. So from this perspective, it might seem that the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, was written later to reflect what actually happened. And that's certainly possible. Again, it all depends so there's a couple of questions to consider, and this, I was reading a really interesting piece by Professor and Rabbi Lawrence Schiffman, which I linked to somewhere here, where he talks about being able to have faith in the Torah being God-given, and also believing that it was written by man or men with several different authors. Just, can I get a reader for this one? And then once we start reading, I'll remember why I put it in there. Any volunteers? Unfortunately, I can't see most of you, so just jump in.
I can read it.
Go for it, Sandy. Thank you.
These are the laws and rules that you must carefully observe in the land that the Lord God of your fathers is giving you to possess, as long as you live on earth. You must destroy all the sites. Could you make it a little bigger, please?
Sure.
Possible. You must destroy all the sites at which the nations you are to dispossess worship their gods, whether on lofty mountains and on hills, or under any luxuriant tree. Tear down their altars, smash their pillars, put their sacred posts to the fire, and cut down the images of their gods, obliterating their name from that site. Do not worship the Lord your God in like manner, but look only to the site that the Lord your God will choose amidst all your tribes as his habitation, to establish his name there. There you are to go, and there you are to bring your burnt offerings and other sacrifices, your tithes and contributions, your votive and farewell offerings.
The last line.
And the firstlings of your herds and flocks.
Right. So there's two messages here. One of which is really disturbing to our modern morality, and there's no way around it. Where there are commandments to do what would in modern days we call genocide. We can rationalize in terms of the relative morality back in the day. That's how that's the only way people knew how to fight, and all of that. But it's a difficult one for us. But the other message, and the reason I was bringing it, is because this is another example of the centralizing of the offerings of the worship, and it gives the rationale, because this is how the people that you're dispossessing, they would just worship whoever they wanted, wherever they wanted, and the number one threat back then was idol worship. And so by centralizing it and having the professionals do it, it minimized the risk of it turning to idol worship. So that's that. And then of course we go into the Shema, and this is not repeated in other parts. One of the struggles that people have is just defining what is the Shema. Right? It's often referred to as a prayer, but if you think of prayer in terms of asking for something, or of praise, or of thanking, it doesn't have any of those elements in it. Right? It's really more of a proclamation, a statement of faith. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. And traditionally, we say it when we rise, we say it when we go to sleep, we say it before we die. So it's really, about as central as it gets. And you've probably all heard this story. I'm assuming it's true. But if it's not, it's still worth repeating. Of a rabbi who would go around to orphanages in Europe after the Holocaust, and just shout out the Shema and look at the kids, and any kid that would react or start crying or something like that, he would say, this kid must be must be Jewish, right? Because why else would the kid react to it? It must bring back some memory, conscious or otherwise, of their parents reciting it to them. The next part of it is basically the deal. And it's obviously brought in the context of the time when people were farmers and were heavily dependent on agriculture. And it says, if you follow my ways, you'll get the rain, you'll get the produce, you'll be successful. If you don't, you won't. Does somebody want to read it?
Rabbi says, I'll read it.
Go for it. Thank you.
Okay. If then you obey the commandments that I enjoin upon you this day, loving the Lord your God and serving him with all your heart and soul, I will grant the rain for your land in season, the early rain and the late. You shall gather in your new grain and the wine and oil. I will also provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and thus you shall eat your fill. Take care not to be lured away to serve other gods and bow to them, for the Lord's anger will flare up against you, and he will shut up the skies so there will be no rain, and the ground will not yield its produce, and you will soon perish from the good land that the Lord is assigning to you. Therefore, impress these words upon your very heart. Bind them as a sign to your hand.
Do you see where the hand is?
Them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Then teach them to your children, reciting them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up, and inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, to the end that you and your children may endure in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to assign to them, as long as there is a heaven over the earth.
Thank you. So when you hear this or when you read it, what comes up for you? Anybody want to jump into the fray?
You're told exactly what is expected of you. There's no ambiguity.
Okay.
There's a benevolence, and then not so benevolent. Like they just said, it's sort of a black and white kind of situation.
Right. And does your reality reflect that?
No, never does. I don't think.
Yeah. So that makes it challenging for a lot of people. Right. Okay.
I was going to say that I think it also speaks to our responsibilities for the next generation and those afterwards.
I hear that.
Yep.
Anybody else want to jump in?
I think it does speak to some of our realities. I think that if we interpret our blessings, that somehow we did something good to earn it, and when things don't go well, that's a punishment maybe, and we did something to earn that, or to deserve that. So I think it's your interpretation of what goes on in your life, whether you're being rewarded or punished, if some people have that perspective.
I hear that.
Of course, if you think that people who are having a bad life are being punished, then you automatically think there must be something wrong with them. So another conclusion you could draw is that anyone who's not, doing well or having, any good luck, or who's, going through terrible circumstances, this is punishment because the person's basically no good.
Right.
It seems rather simple-minded to me.
Exactly. And I think that, there's an in-between, but it definitely requires interpretation, right? If we take it completely literally, then it is really difficult to swallow. it worked for people because they didn't understand why earthquakes happened, or they didn't understand why hurricanes happened, or they didn't understand cancer and a whole bunch of other things. And to some degree, we still don't understand, right? But the framework that there are consequences for our actions, and there are rewards, whether they're on a human level or whether on a superhuman level, is helpful in the sense of people taking responsibility, right? If we go to the other extreme and we just say, it's all random anyway, well, then why bother doing the right thing? Right? So the question isn't whether there's consequences. The question is how those consequences come about. Right? And we know this, just from human interaction. When we're nice to people, usually they're nicer to us. When we give people attitude, again, usually.
Well, the puzzle is we've seen people. The Holocaust is one example, who are meticulous in their performance of the mitzvahs, suffer.
Right, and that's where some people find answers by looking at the afterlife, the world to come, and saying, this, although it's certainly presented as this happening in the reward and punishment happening in this world, the score gets even in the world to come. So that's one way of doing it. Another theology that some people have, which is, I've always had trouble with it, is this idea that we don't know, we don't see the bigger picture, and so what looks like it might be bad might actually be good, and what looks good might be bad. Again, from the way it's presented on a very human level, about people's crops. And in a way that they would understand it to be good. Go ahead, Sandra.
What I wanted to add is to go back to a comment made about how people look upon those with a lot of bad things happening and think about, what did they do? I think that's such a strong tradition of belief in our history to this day, that it's not what other people think only, but it's what we internalize, that what did I do to deserve this? There's no rational way of getting away from that. I mean, I have such strong visions of my mother saying to me, God's going to punish you. And believe me, I didn't make it up. So for infractions, whatever they may be. I mean, this is what we're taught. We are responsible for ourselves and we are going to be punished. And it's very hard to shake that. And maybe we should shake it. I don't know, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, in that vein, just on Friday, I had a visit, a hospice visit with a woman. When I asked her if she was Jewish, she practically, I don't know if snorted is the right word, but, said, unfortunately, and I don't observe any of it. I said, okay, And then she stopped. And she said, actually, I do one thing. I observe my mother's yard site. Mm. And then that led her into talking about placing her mother in a nursing home when her mother had Alzheimer's and when she couldn't handle caring for her anymore, which led her to then say, that's why I must be suffering now, because I put my mother in a nursing home and God is punishing me. Mm. And she's alive, a highly successful, intelligent woman. But when it comes down to it, we need to make sense of what's happening to us, and we do, and we find it in different ways. Does anybody else want to jump into that before we go further? All right. So some more quotes from the Book of Devarim. This is obviously it's a 30 chapter book, so This is very limited. Yishamer pen tishkach, take care lest you forget the Lord your God and fail to keep his commandments. Right, and this term, and we've talked about in the high holidays of zachor, to remember or forget, is not necessarily literally that you forget that God exists, but it's that you forget the importance of, or something along those lines. And then another one, does somebody want to read?
Okay, I'll read it. It's Ruth.
Thanks, Ruth.
Know then that this is not for any virtue of yours, that the Lord your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stiff-necked people. Remember, never forget, how you provoked the Lord your God to anger in the wilderness. From the day that you left the land of Egypt until you reached this place, you have continued defiant toward the Lord.
Right. I always cringe a little, when we do the Lechuna Ranina and we read it in English at the end there, that last section, especially when kids are reading it. And it says, you're a stiff-necked people, and that's why you're not getting into the land. And it's always like, I don't know how they're going to take that.
Could I just add something? It reminds me, and I should have said it before, Rabbi Neuberger's sister is an author. Neuberger, I forget her first name. And she's written some really interesting books. And she wrote a review in the New York Times, book review, about a famous atheist an author that had recently died. And she said he was famous for saying when he was dying, he said, I don't know why God's doing this to me. He knows I don't believe in him.
Yeah.
So that's as ingrained as you get.
Yeah. And what I found, in my hospice work is that we're much more compartmentalized and fragmented in our beliefs than we think we are. And we like to think that we're objective about things and that we have a consistent belief system. The reality is that we're made up of our experiences, of the lessons we were taught as children, and all of that. And sometimes one part of that shows up unexpectedly. But I think the book of Deuteronomy is, let's see. Yeah, I'm just going to jump to this because I don't know if we're going to have time for the other one. So the Sifri on Deuteronomy is quite extensive, as you can see. And he is abundantly clear from his perspective that the book of Deuteronomy is rebuke. Right? It's that message of you're a stiff-necked people. You don't know how to follow the rules, and you're always getting in trouble, right? And I think about how now that I'm a father, about how to raise a child, the messaging that we send, right? And we all at different times are try to think of how can I motivate somebody. I can go the positive way. I can call it scaring or call it, tough love, but going that way. But basically, from the Sifri's perspective, Moses is rebuking them out of love, with the motivation that to kind of shock them out of their complacency, and make sure that they're really know what they're getting into as they get out of the protection in the desert, which is kind of ironic to think of that. But the bubble that they were living in the desert and having a lot more responsibility once they're in the land of Israel settled. Anybody else want to read? All right, I'll start. If somebody wants to pick up, just jump in. So, Sifri for Devarim. These are the words, right? This is the quote that's there. These are the words which Moses spoke. Now, did Moshe prophesy only these? Right? It says these are the words, and then it goes on to say things. So he questions, isn't it all from Moses? Did he not write the entire Torah? As it says, and Moses wrote this Torah. What then is the intent of these are the words? We are hereby taught that they were words of rebuke, just like, and Yeshurun, right? You should know that word. It's a way of referring to the Jewish people. Yeshurun grew fat and it kicked. Basically, they grew complacent. Similarly, in the book of Amos, or Amos, one of my favorite books, it has that famous quote where it says, you know, I don't need your sacrifices. I need you to act like good people. Hear this prophecy which the Lord spoke. Now, did Amos prophesy only these? And he goes on to list a bunch of different examples where it says something like that, and then there are words of rebuke that follow. Is it not written the words of Amos, one of the herders of Tekoa, who saw visions, plural, concerning Israel? The intent of this prophecy is that they were words of rebuke. Similarly, hear this thing, you cows of Bashan on Mount Shomron. The cows of Bashan are their corrupt judges. Similarly, from the book of Jeremiah, right? And he's really kind of giving us a sampling here of a whole bunch of books of the Tanakh, right? Because the word Torah is often referred to just the first 5 books of Moses, but of course there's a whole bunch of other books. Similarly, the words that came to Jeremiah, and these are the words that the Lord spoke. Now, did Jeremiah prophesy only these? Did he not write the entire book? Until hear the words of Jeremiah. What then is the intent of, and these are the words? We are hereby taught that they were words of rebuke. Right, and this is, you know, it's a difficult perspective to hear, but it's also an important one to hear in terms of personal responsibility. Right, we live in an age of outrage, where people are quick to point out other people's shortcomings and what they should do. And are less focused on their own shortcomings. A sound of terror have we heard, of fear? Okay, you got the general idea. So we got about 2 minutes. Any questions, concerns, hopes, dreams, thoughts?
I have one question about the promised land and the topic that we talked about at the beginning, about how it was extended to include the lands that were east of the Jordan.
Yeah.
So if that is true, if this was acknowledged by God, that these lands also, where they were before they crossed the Jordan, also were part of the promised land, in that case, then Moses would have reached the promised land and not been frustrated in not reaching it. So this would have been a way to at least give him something.
Absolutely. I mean, even in Devarim, there are places that kind of delineate that this is sort of the broader Israel. But that's certainly a valid perspective. All right. Any announcements, Sandy? You're muted.
Yes. I mentioned before you came on about next Saturday night and Sunday for Tisha B'Av. Do you want to say a few words about Sunday afternoon?
Yeah. So actually, let me pull up that email
Okay.
so it doesn't crash the computer. Yeah, so there's going to be different rabbis teaching throughout the day, and I'll pull up the topic here in a second. Let's see, stop share. And I will be teaching at 3 o'clock, and it's different topics about, generally about Tisha B'Av. So it's a day of learning. Tisha B'Av, like I said before, is considered the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. And it's a day of reflection, mourning. And so in that vein, I'm going to talk about some of the mourning rituals that Judaism has, taken on in the past, in the present, their history, particularly a focus on the Kaddish, and how it evolved to become a morning prayer when it doesn't seem like it started off that way. So at 11 a.m., Rabbi Pearl from Congregation B'nai Israel is going to talk about limits of public discussion and dispute. Tisha B'Av resulted from an inability to disagree in a constructive manner and work towards a common solution.
That's right up our alley.
What's that? Yeah, right?
Right up our alley.
Exactly. At 12 o'clock, Rabbi Ivry from Congregation Turas Emes is going to talk about Tisha B'Av, our national day of mourning. At 1 p.m., Rabbi Mendy Katzman of Chabad of Staten Island is going to teach about Tisha B'Av of the past and the future. Maybe you should talk about the present. I don't know. At 2, Rabbi Dr. Jack Cohen, Tisha B'Av, a day of optimism and not sadness, appreciating our miraculous survival as a nation, and the teaching that ultimately Tisha B'Av will become a day of celebration. And then myself at 3 o'clock, the evolution of communal and personal mourning rituals in Judaism.
So you're the last speaker?
I am.
Okay.
I'm sorry, this is all on one link?
This is all on one link. Dan, do you have it? I'll forward it to you right now, and then you can. Thank you. And so the services that we're going to have at night and in the morning are going to be, like regular Saturday night services and Sunday morning services, and we'll also do a little bit of the reading. There's a special reading that's done on Tisha B'Av of Eicha and some other, depending on how much time we have.
And the 10 o'clock in the morning is in person?
No.
No,
Okay.
it's
I just
all
wanted
online.
to clarify. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just Saturday morning will be in person.
That's fine. Thank you.
You got it. Well, thank you for joining.
Thank you
I look forward to seeing you guys. It's great to be seeing some of you in person already. And for those I haven't seen in a while, I'm looking forward to it.
I think they left already.
Well, no, Mimi's there, and my friend
Mimi's
Laura.
here?
Yeah. And my
'cause
friend Lauren is on from either Chappaqua or Woodstock.
Oh, because both of them said they were leaving. They're still on?
Yeah,
Well,
Mimi and
one of her
Charlie were
devices-
on and off.
Yeah.
They were rotating.
One of the devices is still on.
Well, yes. We welcome people. Well, certainly Mimi and Charlie aren't new. Lauren, we welcome you. And we welcome Mimi and Charlie. Welcome everybody. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
See you Monday night, 7:30.
Thank you.